as you may well have noticed in the news, things have been made increasingly difficult for people who live in rural areas in Britain, and particularly with, say, the cost of running a farm or urban developments. And we're going to be looking at some of the most recent examples because this is something I'm very passionate about. I see lots of value in rural living over urban living, and I think there are lots of psychological elements that are very healthy for human beings that you can find in the countryside, and the incentives in, say, an urban environment, very population dense, are not particularly good for making moral, good people. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that in a second. But
I interrupt this segment to bring you an important message about this stuff, the dollar. Not going so well, is it? Inflation is out of control and debt is even more out of control. In fact, the US government is on the verge of spending $1 trillion a year just servicing its debt. It spends about $6.6 trillion and it only collects about $4.6 trillion in revenues. So you can see that this situation is rapidly taking a turn for the worse. You might want to consider some gold and silver. And that is why that we've done a partnership deal with Goldco, and we've created lotuseatersgold.com. Go and check that out. It's an offer for our American viewers. You can transfer a proportion of your IRA into this, and if you do so, you're going to get some of this lovely stuff, some bonus silver thrown in on top, up to $10,000. Or you can even take delivery of the physical gold to your home address if you prefer. So if you want money that goes clang when you put it down, check out lotuseatersgold.com.
First, I wanted to highlight the fact that there has been lots of news recently about how evil and nasty people are in the countryside. And this, I think, largely helps to undermine people's sympathy for people who live in rural areas, because people know other people who live in the countryside, I imagine, and they might feel sympathetic that, say, their village is going to be ruined by the actions of the government. And so there has been lots of things that have sought to paint people who live in the countryside as being backward in some way. And there have been a whole host of articles. This one is from The Guardian. This is from February. The English countryside can still feel off limits to people of colour. We are working to change that. And if you move to the next one, John, this one's from The Times. Is rural racism real? Yes, I remember it well. And here we have the BBC. This is all the way back in July of 2021. Rural racism in Dorset. Why is our countryside 98% white? And again, here's the Telegraph. This is more reporting on what someone else said. British countryside is racist, says Countryfile presenter. And this is the more recent one from the New York Times. I don't know what the New York Times has to do with the English countryside, but apparently it's a place of profound inequality. And here they're mostly talking about how in some places 80% of the houses are second homes, which is just painting, yes, these things have already been destroyed. You don't necessarily need to feel bad for them anymore because they've already been bought up. This is, the 1%ers ruining the countryside, so it doesn't matter if we impose things on them. That's kind of me reading between the lines, between all of the different media narratives that we've had. Also a very nice picture there. And one of the main things I think that is destroying rural areas is building lots of new homes in a community. Quite often, rural villages have been around for hundreds, if not some even thousands of years. And so they're very stratified. Some of the homes are, sites of historic importance. The communities are very static. Some people have lived there for several generations. And so introducing lots of new people shatters the ecosystem, the society which is built up in these towns. And I think that it's quite a tragedy, really, that this sort of thing is going on. And particularly because the pressure for lots of these new builds is coming artificially from our population isn't naturally increasing. It's increasing because of things like mass immigration, which is politically motivated. But I wanted to draw attention to this next article here. This is from the Leicester Mercury. So I like reading local news because they pick up on some of the issues that national news simply miss because they're too small. And it says, fears new townhomes will turn countryside into nondescript suburbia. And that's exactly what's going on. It's going to lose the charm of what made it nice in the first place. And it's just going to become another suburban area. It's going to perhaps even become swallowed up by a city. And You've had lots of experience going around the country. Is this something that you've noticed to a certain extent already?
Definitely. It's been going on for donkeys. So my background, for those that don't know who I am, is I had a channel called The Bald Explorer, Bald, and I used to go exploring with my camera around looking at heritage, landscape, and nature. And the depressing sites were the farm fields, which were there for generations and generations, providing food for this country, are being dug up, concreted over, bricked up with what effectively, to me, looks like concentration camps of houses. And the houses may have slight variation. You might have 3 or 4 different types of houses that make up these new builds, but it's everywhere. And if you drive around the countryside now, particularly in Sussex, where I'm based, there's very few places in which there is a big buffer of countryside. So many, particularly on the coast, the coast has been swallowed up by new builds. And they're all supposedly affordable, but a lot of them seem to be very executive. And they also have a build quality that looks like in 10 years' time you'll be repairing and maintaining, unlike perhaps in the Victorian era when they built very sturdy houses that, okay, now 150 odd years later, they do need some attention, but the new stuff is so flimsy. And you read plenty of reports in local papers of people complaining about how their wonderful new house is falling to bits. But it's a worrying, well, it's more than a worrying trend. It's a deliberate destruction of our countryside. Absolutely.
I'm glad you see it the same way. And I would add on to that many of the new builds that are being built remind me of some of the Chinese construction that I've seen, where there's like a balcony in a very tall apartment, and you can just peel it off of the wall because it's made in such a poor way that if
you've got these balconies or these rails on windows that are supposed to be representative of perhaps a real balcony, you can't walk onto it. Some of these, what look like French windows, you can't open them. They just hit the metal rail. There's a lot of meanness in the design. The architects who do these should be absolutely embarrassed by what they're doing, but they've got their hands contained by the developers and the government and authority to build what effectively is going to be the 15-minute cities,
and
which is the prison that they are pushing us into.
Yeah, it certainly seems to be going that way. And I think that if this is going to sound silly, but if people can be removed from the countryside and slowly incentivized to move into cities, well, if they're concentrated in a certain area, it's going to make them easier to control. And that wasn't an allusion to anything else. That's just perhaps not the best word to use. But
well, it clearly is, though, isn't it? If you've got people concentrated, as I said, concentration camps, it doesn't have to have any wartime connotation. That if you concentrate people in one area, you have control of those people.
Yes, and I think that it is part of this sort of concerted effort. And so if we move on to some of the other examples, these are just recent examples that I've seen in the news. Here's a Devon village that could be getting dozens of new homes, particularly of significance to me because I'm from Devonshire, and I am starting to see what I thought was isolated to some of the other parts of the southern hemisphere bleed into Devon now. Like there's sky-high rates of crime that are related to immigration largely, and people are being moved down from, say, Liverpool and Manchester from council houses because there's a shortage of them up there to ones down here, down to Devon, sorry, and it's leading to lots more crime, lots of violent crime, knife crime even, which is unheard of where I grew up, and it's quite a shame really because it's destroying the community that I grew up with and was used to and really valued, and it's a shame that one of the last bastions of that.
I think shame, when you say it's a shame, is putting it incredibly mildly, because
I'm trying to contain my anger.
When things are, it's a shame. Oh well, never mind. It's it's terrible.
Hmm.
I mean, it's dreadful. It shouldn't happen, and we have to resist this. This is a country. You mentioned earlier, or in the reports that says it's racist because white people live in what was a white country,
Hmm.
and these villages, because they are not the cities and the towns where perhaps other people have migrated to in large numbers, regardless of skin color or anything, and the towns and villages have been secondarily in migrated to. How can you say it's racist that white people who have traditionally lived in this country live in this country?
Hmm.
I mean, it's a nonsense. But that's an agenda being pushed. We know that. I mean, we're not stupid, are we? We know that that is an agenda to make white people feel that they are in the wrong place. I,
Hmm.
as a white middle class, middle-aged man, do not. I no longer exist. You know, look at adverts on the television. I've been wiped out. I no longer exist.
Yeah, that's one of the most egregious examples, isn't it? Where you'll struggle to find.
But we do exist.
yeah.
You know, that the thing is, and I think people are waking up to this rubbish. Absolutely waking up to it. The other thing that we didn't touch on, which I think is very important, is with new builds and new materials coming into the country. So you go around the UK and you'll find where I am in Sussex, the geology is where I am is chalk and flint, and then green sand and clay. And that is represented in the buildings. And when you build in the material that is local to that, the buildings look right. They sit nicely in the country. There is an aesthetic.
Bath is certainly a great example of that.
Exactly. So you've got Bath stone, you've got what's the other stone from down in Dorset that they use?
Oh, I know. I can't remember the name.
Come to me in a minute. And then if you go up into Scotland, say you've got the Granite City. In the Cotswolds, you've got Oolithic limestone. You've got everywhere you go up into say Cheshire or Shropshire, and you'll see the timber frame buildings because there's a lot more trees, Elizabethan buildings with wattle and daub, and Georgian stuff. And it all looks right. But what we're now seeing is this bland, utilitarian, boring, drab design going everywhere. And I live on the coast, and you'll see in the Regency period, we had some very beautiful buildings because people were coming to the seaside. They were taking the water, and the whole seaside, what would you call it? The seaside event, if you like, of going on holiday, taking the water, relaxation. And you had all that beautiful, lovely architecture, Regency, Victorian, bit Georgian. But now, again, all along the coast, you'll see this boring utilitarian inner city type of buildings, inappropriate, being built. And this is being done all over the place. And I mean, this is one of the problems with the new builds is there's no attention to where it's going and local. I wouldn't mind so much if it was local materials and it looked right and spaced right and housed people because if you don't have aesthetics where you live, you're also going to get mental issues associated with it. If you feel crammed in, if it's boring, if there's no space to it, then you're going to get ill.
That's very true.
Again, part of the agenda.
Mm-hmm. And I think that having, as someone who's lived in Swindon for nearly 3 years, I can certainly tell you with authority, if you live around ugly buildings in a rundown area, it gets to you. It's depressing.
Hence your crime will increase.
Hopefully not mine personally.
No, but crime. I mean, you were talking about in Devon, and as soon as you start bringing in all these different elements, the Portland Purbeck stone, there we go. Portland
Thank you, John.
Stone. Thank you very much. Once you start bringing in a bland environment where there's no aesthetics, there's no aspiration. So you're getting drab. And then, of course, as you said, you're bringing in immigrants or moving people. And in order to bring them into our culture and our traditions, the architecture is very much part of that. The space you live in inspires you or not, as the case may be. And if you just house people in boxes, in utilitarian boxes, ticky-tacky boxes, then you're just asking for trouble. I mean, it seems so obvious.
It does, and I actually covered this in a conversation that I'm going to get onto and talk about in a second. But I actually did a whole video about urban environments and how they affect you psychologically and incentivize certain negative behavior. But if you can move on to another one, John. This is, I think, in Northampton, 900 homes in the countryside, which is the size of a reasonable town, just astroturfed there, I suppose, which I find really frustrating. But this next one, I thought, to give credit to the French, I know I'm going to lose my passport for this, but rural France will suffer most from no new build policy, warns Mayor. And this is, I think, actually something to do with their push for net zero, because they mentioned 2050, which of course is the key number, and there's no net such and such. But the idea is that you preserve rural France by not building new houses in it, which seems common sense to me. So yes, we're being outdone by the French. This as a patriotic British man.
I mean, you've got to ask yourself, why is it rural?
Mm-hmm.
Well, because you have farms.
Yes.
Because you need to grow food.
Mm-hmm.
You need space. You need countryside. You need places for wildlife. I mean, rural isn't just a thing that you just happen to have. It has its place. It's a very important part of your ecosystem and part of your country. You can't just keep building, and then think, oh, actually, we do need to grow things. We do need all these species on this. We may be the dominant species on this planet, but we still owe it to all these other creatures. You know, we're not gods.
Mm-hmm. I'm quite keen on the sort of biblical notion of stewardship. I think that characterization of the environment is very good, because it sets the right tone for how you should approach the environment more generally, I think. But moving on to something else entirely, if you manage to defeat all of these new builds in your local community, somehow you resist your local council or the government's efforts to turn your lovely village into a concrete hellhole, well, it seems like the government is going to just build some great big power lines. And Oliver Dowden here, who I absolutely despise, says, onshore power won't blight countryside, says Dowden, amid unease over pylons. And normally when a Conservative says something, it normally means the opposite. And this is somewhat indicated by this next link here by the Daily Mail. Pay people to support electricity pylons near their countryside homes. Net Zero Czar suggests lump sum reward to speed up grid improvements amid Tory row over rural power lines. So yes, they're already thinking of ways to make it at least palatable for people to swallow this. And I find it really quite frustrating. Obviously, power lines have to go somewhere, but it seems...
So, but can I just ask?
Of course.
Why? Why do the power lines? Have we not got power lines? Have we not got a national grid already set up? Why do we need a lot more power lines?
I don't really understand why we need more of them, but I was going to suggest that it's probably a good idea not to have them right next to where people are living.
Well, we know that. I mean, again, science have shown that the outfall from electricity radiation is not good over power lines.
I'd suggest, Richard, it's all very, very, very deliberate. Part of an agenda. I think you mentioned earlier an agenda. You had a link from the New York Slimes earlier, didn't you? What place have they got to be passing judgment on the British countryside?
I know, yeah.
You know, they're part of Operation Mockingbird still. They're obviously part of the agenda. And the idea that you will just concrete over all of Britain, I think it's a very, very cynical and deliberate thing. Well, it's our heritage, something we value and love. So it must be annihilated then, for its own sake. The idea that the countryside is racist, you just characterise it as a nonsense. Yeah, absolutely. Complete nonsense. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Just feel guilty and put up with what you love being destroyed. That's what it is. It's got nothing really to do with anything else, like the logistics of power lines. No, it's something that's beautiful that we value. So let's ruin it.
Yeah, and power lines...
Might be wrong about that, but that's how I feel.
I know that people love... what do you call the towers? The
pylons.
Pylons. There are pylon collectors. You can go online and find a pylon. People love them, and they number them and they look for them, which is fine. I've got no problem with that whatsoever. We've all got our quirks, and good luck to them. However, obviously, you don't want them all over the place. It's interesting if you look at the amount of wind farms that are going up. We all know what wind farms are. These are these things that are supposed to be run by the wind, that you need
Very rarely
diesel,
works, yeah.
that you need diesel to actually get going. And then if the wind drops, you still need the diesel to keep them going. And if it goes over 30 miles an hour, you have to turn them off. Very useful things. Where are the power lines for those?
I suppose they're underground, aren't
you
they?
never
Yeah.
see them, do you? You never see they're not overground. So are they underground?
I guess they must be, yeah.
All of them? Everyone? I mean, they're all over the place. We had a whole load bunged in the sea opposite where I live. It's got a name, can't remember it. Typical when you're filming. And we had this massive, great scar across the countryside in which the power lines, I forget whether I think it's for EDF, massive, great scar where they dug up the thing. And supposedly in there is the power lines. I'm not saying they're not there. I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. But you see all these wind farms. There's no overhead, which would be cheaper, easier to monitor. But you don't see them. Where are they? When were they dug in there? The towers go up and the blades go round by diesel. I'm just getting a bit skeptical that wind farms actually are doing what they're supposed to be doing, because I don't know where the power lines are.
Well, I certainly know that they're not generating enough electricity to pay for themselves.
No.
They are, by definition, pointless anyway.
No, I agree. I
Mm.
mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, the whole thing is such a scam that it's just getting to the point that anybody's taking any of this seriously and not actually challenging government and authority and the councils and saying, actually, I want to see the actual evidence of this, because I just don't believe you. I think it's actually, most of it's rubbish. And all these power lines, will they be actually carrying power, or are they just there as an aesthetic?
Yeah, well, I've not really thought about that, to be honest. I just saw them as an ugly
Again,
sort of necessity.
Another blight to keep us down.
Mm-hmm. And it's worth mentioning as well that I have my episode of Contemplations, Are Cities the Problem?, where I talk about the psychology of living in a city and how it's detrimental to being what I see as a good person. And actually, sorry, Bo, I know you grew up in the big smoke, didn't you?
Yeah, I'm a London boy, and these country bumpkins, they can't deal with it. All joking aside, though, I do think that is going too far. That a cityscape ruins your character. I don't
think it ruins your character, but it puts incentives in place that make bad behavior more likely, I think.
Maybe.
Okay, well, another thing which has been in the news is this, and this is debanking gun clubs. So banks have supposedly shut a third of all gun clubs' accounts, which seems entirely unnecessary to me. So this is HSBC, Barclays, Lloyds, and NatWest. They're refusing accounts or credit to businesses linked to what is seen as largely a countryside pursuit, isn't it? It's sort of rural hunting. I think something like 90% of all firearms are in Devon and Cornwall, which are very rural areas. And so it's just another punitive measure against people in the countryside doing what they do. Because I think if you have instincts that are moored in your time and place and in your culture, you're going to be more sure of your own beliefs, and therefore you're going to be less susceptible to being brainwashed into whatever agenda is being designed for you by the people in Whitehall and Westminster, or Davos for that matter. And I'd certainly be remiss if I didn't mention farming as well. The NFU recently raised, as of yesterday, concerns with the UK's food self-sufficiency. This should be something that we've sorted out already, really, if we were in a sort of realistic world, which obviously we're not, because being self-sufficient with your food is essential to national defence. I mean, did we not learn our lessons from, say, World War II, where we relied on importing food, and that gave our enemies a certain amount of power over us. They could leverage it.
Big for victory.
Exactly, yeah. But yes, I would like to see more food self-sufficiency. And here we have another example. This is from the 6th of August, about Bristol City Council basically incentivising or pressuring the last city farm owner in Bristol to basically settle up about half of her most productive land so they can build a crematorium, which I thought was quite a fitting analogy, really, that they're going to infringe on agricultural land to build a crematorium. Well, I imagine you'll probably need a few more if you continue approaching agriculture in this way.
Isn't it weird though, the seemingly global, or at least in the West, the agenda to have a war on farms and farmers? That's so sinister, isn't it?
It basically seems like a prerequisite for mass population control, doesn't it?
Like
I know that sounds quite conspiratorially minded, but
no, it's the cause and effect of that. Yeah, if you can't grow enough food, people start to starve.
I'm staggered there because you need to turn farms into crematoriums suggests that there is going to be an increase in deaths. And didn't we have a recent event in which some magic solution was put into people's arms that has not gone down terribly well? I know the NHS have decided to increase the size of their mortuaries tenfold because apparently they're expecting a lot more deaths. And when asked, the person who told me, the whistleblower who told me, said, well, what with global warming, there might be more floods and more fires. And that was the reason that we would suddenly need tenfold more mortuaries. Mortuaries, obviously, you've got to put the bodies somewhere. So we need this space for crematorium so we can burn them and then presumably sprinkle the ashes somewhere. And the great thing about a crematorium and the places where you put ashes and things is that you won't be able to put it back into farmland, because not for 100 years or so, because you can't go around digging up the remains or the scattered remains of deceased people. Farms are being targeted, and the self-sufficiency thing is a huge problem, and it's just not being addressed. And on my channel, I'm encouraging everybody to grow food, because we're going to see very shortly next year, we're going to see massive shortages of food. We can see already, and this is not, you may think this is conspiratorial, and it probably is a conspiracy, but it doesn't mean it's not true, that the weather is being engineered. You look at the moment, we've been told that July was the hottest July on record. And that's obviously not true. You only have to have lived through July and know.
Pouring with rain, yeah.
It hasn't stopped raining in Swindon.
We're in the era of global boiling, apparently, now, according to the UN, which is, again, a palpable lie. And the weather is being manipulated so that next year crops will not be at the height that they will be in or should be in. And there's going to be a food shortage. And we need farmland, and we need people to grow. There are wonderful ways of doing it. No dig that Charles Dowding has given to the world and pioneered, and he's down your way a bit, not in Swindon, but near Devon. He's in Somerset, where they like that. See, it's nice in Somerset. But yeah, we've got to get people growing, even if it's in window boxes or anywhere. And somebody got in touch with me, and although I often get criticized for my strident views, somebody said if people used their gardens instead of boring, useless, monocultured lawns where they're just trying to get one type of grass and it looks nice, but actually did a no-dig type garden, we could go back to, as you said, you mentioned Dig for Victory, where people were the most healthiest they'd ever been for hundreds of years during the Second World War, because they weren't eating the highly processed, poisoned food in supermarkets and the dreadful lacking in minerals and vitamins of the fruit and veg in supermarkets. People should be buying from farm shops or growing their own. And this is so serious. I mean, this is so serious that people are just not taking it seriously.
I saw the other day some statistics about certain types of diseases and childhood cancers amongst the Amish community is almost non-existent because they eat food they've grown themselves organically.
They also have a lot of manual labor, don't they? And so they've got all of the building blocks of living a healthy lifestyle.
Certainly their children don't eat really any processed food. And suddenly lots of their diseases are just non-existent to them. I don't know if that was Amish propaganda or...
So sorry, just say that again. So you're saying that they're not ill?
Yeah, or
Because
less.
They get ill a lot less, I think.
That's self-evident, isn't it? If you eat food that has minerals and vitamins and all the nutrients that the body needs, if you're drinking pure water, you're not. I mean, if you drink tap water, you're a fool because it's poison. I wouldn't. If you see what's in tap water, you wouldn't drink it. If you're not filtering your water, you're an idiot.
Oh.
No, I'm being serious. I mean, unless you look into these things, you just don't know. You assume that what comes out the tap is okay. But if you go to your local water supplier and say, could you give me an analysis, please, of what's in my water, you'll be surprised at what is in the water. And I've been told then, if you go back to them and say, actually, you're not supplying H2O, which is 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen, you're not supplying what you're saying, they'll say, oh, well, we won't charge you then.
All right. Well, that sounds worthwhile.
Well, definitely worthwhile, because if trade's description, if they're not actually selling you H2O water, but they're sending you a mixture of arsenic and all sorts of stuff in there, think of the pill that millions of women are weeing down the loo that's going back.
I've heard about this. Yeah.
If you don't drink filtered water and a good filter, you are seriously likely to be ill.
It's turning the frogs gay, I've heard.
It may well be. It's boiling the frogs in the bath, and they're not. They don't know it. But it's the same with food. People are going to supermarkets, and I recommend putting on a pair of glasses, which do not actually exist, that when you look at the shelves of the brightly coloured food, what you actually see is blue bottles with poison in, because they have so much rubbish in the food. This is why people have got to grow it themselves or go to organic farmers or as near to organic farmers and support farm shops.
Okay, well, I don't think we have time to go through some of the other stuff, so I think that's all right. No, it's okay. I put it towards the end because it was some of the less pressing stuff, but I think that we've pretty much established, yes, there does seem to be a concerted effort against the rural areas of Britain, largely because the nature of the communities themselves seem to lend themselves well to making people more sure of what they believe, and therefore they're less easy to control. I think that's at least a fair summary of what we've been talking about.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the premium book clubs, this one on Julius Evola's Fascism Viewed from the Right. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.